There we go. So yeah, thanks for joining us to this webinar, which I hope will be the first of the webinar series. If anyone has any suggestions on topics that they would like to see us cover in the future, please do let us know. For today, though, we're going to be talking about how to respond to consultations and making submissions in the offshore renewable energy process in Ireland, but also, as you'll see, in other countries, particularly the UK. We thought this would be useful because Ireland is currently in expanding and developing a lot of its offshore renewable energy and marine spatial planning. I know that when I started this job, I had never done a consultation before, never made any submissions, so it was quite difficult to know where to start. So I hope that this will be a good launching pad for people to be able to start if they've never done them before, and specifically on ORE, if you've done consultations for other topics before, this will also be useful. But before I move on to offshore renewable energy, I wanted to introduce MARÉIRE, which is the project that I coordinate at the Irish Environmental Network and that Stephen and Rochelle are team members of as part of their organizations. MARÉIRE, which stands for Marine Renewable Energy and the Irish environment, aims to be a unifying voice for Irish ENGOs on the topic of offshore renewable energy. We hope that by engaging early in the process, the project will ensure that the environment is considered in all phases of the development. And we have a focus on advocacy and finding a balance between mitigating the climate crisis and protecting marine biodiversity in general. MARÉIRE, we hope, will provide expert scientific and evidence-based information while recognizing that we have a diverse audience, which can range from policymakers to stakeholders to the general public, and of course, members of the environmental NGO sector. So what about offshore renewable energy in Ireland? Ireland currently has a target of producing 5 gigawatts of electricity from offshore renewable energy by 2030. That is then up to 20 gigawatts by 2040 and 37 by 2050. The main technology that is used for this at the moment is fixed wind turbines, but floating wind technology is being pushed and is emerging as a potential area for Ireland for expansion into deeper waters, whether that's off the west coast or in the Celtic Sea. So Ireland is currently transitioning through 2 phases of offshore renewable energy development. The first phase consists of legacy projects, while the second phase introduces a more strategic plan-led approach. So phase 1 involved legacy projects that were initiated before the current regulatory framework was established. Developers did identify and propose their own sites, with some progressing under older system like foreshore leases, for example. And to enable their continuation under the new rules, the Maritime Area Planning Act introduced MACs, or Maritime Area Consents, which are issued by MARA, the Maritime Area Regulatory Authority, and they grant non-exclusive rights to occupy a specified area of the maritime zone for offshore wind development. A MAC does not permit construction. Developers then have to seek separate planning and environmental approvals. And then moving into phase 2, phase 2 represents a significant shift to a plan-led model. So instead of developers choosing sites, the Irish government identifies suitable zones, including for offshore development, through the designated maritime area plans. This ensures that the hope is that this will ensure a more strategic, balanced approach that will integrate environmental, social, and economic factors. So then once these DMAPs are identified, developers apply for rights within them to compete for the opportunity to develop their own projects. DMAPs are a broader initiative to hopefully guide sustainable use of Ireland's marine space, particularly for ORE. The key difference then between the two is that the site selection process. Developers in phase one, developers independently identified and proposed sites, whereas in phase two, it's the state that designates them designates the areas through DMAPs. Moving on to the topic of today, there are multiple opportunities for public and stakeholder consultations through the DMAP process, as well as in the phase one development. For example, the South Coast DMAP, which is the first of the DMAPs to have been established, the draft was launched in 2023 with an initial consultation from August to October 2023. They then held stakeholder engagements events at the end of 2023, and the final draft of the South Coast DMAP and its associated environmental assessments. So what you can see is called the SEA, which is Strategic Environmental Assessments, Environmental Report, and then the Natural Impact Statement, NIS, were available for public consultation about this time last year. And the final proposal was then approved at the end of 2024. Within the DMAP, there are 4 proposed areas for ORE development, the first of which, Ton Nua, will be the first to be auctioned off by the end of 2025. So it's still unclear how and when future DMAPs will be developed, but we can expect that during that whole process, there will be opportunities for consultations and engagement. Where do we find out about these opportunities and at what point do they come into play, these opportunities for consultation? Well, there's the legislative and policy level, which is usually at governmental or EU Commission level. So we can have opportunities for input on draft legislation, white papers, and national strategies. As I just said, there's also the DMAP development process. And then further, as we narrow in, there's also the individual project planning applications, which include those environmental assessments that I was talking about. Those are usually, those submissions are made to Bortoluzzi and ALA. And then there's also other opportunities, including for the licensing, mostly and up until now, always maritime usage licenses, although it's possible that in the future, maritime area consent applications might be subject to public consultation, but that's not been the case yet. And those are run by MARA. And then we also have occasionally consultations run by organizations like AirGrid, for example, on grid infrastructure. I won't go through each of these links now, but they will be available to look back on. And these are the places where you might go and find these consultations and hear about these consultation calls. What's also important to remember is that the network, your network, the IEN and civil society in general, but also the PBN network, these are all really important places to share once you find out or once your network finds out about these opportunities, to share them with others so that everyone can get involved. So that's enough from me because I've already gone over time. But I want to introduce our panel for today. We have 4 speakers. They're all going to present a slightly different topic around making submissions to consultations. They'll each talk for around 10 minutes, and we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. And we're going to start with Dr. Donald Griffin, who is the campaign coordinator at Fair Seas. He has plenty of policy experience. He's been the Marine Policy Officer for Fair Seas and other organisations. So plenty of experience, and over his time, he's responded to numerous consultations. So he's going to provide us with some practical tips to get everyone started. Over to you, Donal.
Jenny, I'll share my screen here now. Started. Is that the right screen you're seeing with the shark? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi folks. So yeah, I'm Donal Griffin. I am the Fair Seas campaign coordinator now. Previously I was the Marine Policy Officer. Still a part of my role is coordinating the or responses to various relevant consultations. I'm normally giving presentations on marine protected areas and marine conservation and such things, but this is my own, I suppose, view and take on best practice in responding to public consultations on that broader level, from a very ENGO and very marine perspective. Um, there we go. So I'm just going to start off with a few practical tips to start off your submission, some general advice then, 10 pieces of advice that I kind of stick to that might be useful, and then some practical tips to end your submission. And just to reiterate, this is a very campaigning ENGO perspective. There are other perspectives out there on this, and some of which you'll hear soon. And from someone dealing with local, national, and international marine conservation policy and legislative consultations. So, and importantly, for this webinar, especially not planning consultations, and that's what the other folks will give a more tailored views on that. But this is more of a broader stroke advice, let's say. So just to start very quickly, if you're responding to lots of consultations, my advice would be make a Word doc template. Nothing fancy, doesn't need to be fancy, but it'll help you develop your own process of going through of how to start and finish a submission. And this will make you more efficient at those, of course, in the future. And also, please, please, please create a consultation response folder and save all the consultation documents, because if there are any, normally there are, it'll surprise you how hard they are to find, a day, a week, or a month later when you're going back to this. And also, those documents, these consultations are held online, the documents are online, but you might want to refer back to that consultation document in a year or 2 years' time, which has been the case for me, and those pages are not always kept live. So just be aware that if you want that consultation document, forever, then you need to save it to your own files. So general advice then. So first off, just broadly, like try not to be intimidated by them. And they can be intimidating consultations, like that's for sure. And that there's no right way to respond to a consultation. Consultations themselves and also consultation responses take all shapes and forms and sizes. However, there are less effective ways to go about responding, and there are less effective responses to consultations in my eye. So that's something that we'll talk about. Number two, portal versus email submission. So some consultations sometimes have a submission portal and you can log in and submit maybe a PDF or what have you. That's fine. Some also have a questionnaire survey, and that's how the host of the consultation is looking to get your feedback or thoughts on whatever topic or policy or legislation or strategy or what have you. I have a little bit of quibble with these questionnaires actually. What I would say is don't let them restrict the tone or the content of your submission. If you have stuff to say that doesn't neatly fit in or doesn't fit in with the questions that are in the questionnaire survey, you need to make sure to squeeze it in there somewhere in an open-ended comment box. Normally they're those, to be fair. Or what I normally do is I submit a PDF version of my written consultation response file, and normally there's an email on the consultation webpage, and I submit it there. So it's just something to be mindful of, that you have options, I suppose. But as long as either works fine, survey or written response, as long as you get to say what you want to say. Number three, be aware of the type and stage of the consultation. So there are many different flavors of written public consultation. As I said, is it general public stakeholder, specific, geographically based stakeholder, maybe consultation? You need to think about who is hosting the consultation. Is this the first, second, or third iteration of public written consultation on this issue or policy or legislation? Is something to think about. How far down the road is it in terms of a policy idea or proposal or draft? And is it a consultation itself, i.e., the host is looking to consult you on a draft, something or other, draft policy or legislation, in which there'll be a consultation document that you will read and critique and examine and, you know, submit your thoughts on? Or is it a call for evidence, which sometimes are a broader thing? They're a broader casting of the net for relevant information, data, evidence on a specific topic, which is maybe less defined. Or is it something else completely? There, as I said, there are many different ways that written public consultation comes about from many different bodies and sources. Number four, read the whole consultation document if you can. And my colleagues after me might have different views on that when you get into the planning realm. But certainly read everything directly relating to what you want to refer to in your response. So if I want to refer to speak on MPAs in a consultation document is about MPAs, but also 10 other things of which I'm not an expert in and I don't want to comment on, then I need to make sure that I read everything in that consultation document relating to MPAs. It will be obvious if you don't do that in your response, and your response will have less credibility then, which is like the opposite of what you want. Number five, ask yourself what you want from the consultation. It seems pretty obvious, but it's actually a really useful exercise to ask yourself from the start and use the answer that you have to this question to organize the content of your response. What are the outcomes? What are the changes that you want to see, or what do you want to keep happening that whether they're proposing to remove or to stop, and really use the outcome you want to kind of form the basis of your response. And number six, and this is a really important one, is note the good as well as the bad. It's vitally important that your response highlights what is good, should be kept, committed to, progressed, funded, delivered as soon as possible, these sorts of things, as well as highlighting the failures or improvements that need to happen, or the changes that need to happen in the proposal in the consultation document. And the reason why that's so important is because if we stay silent on something that we actually view as being very good and critical to the success of maybe the whole policy, there may be other interests then lobbying and submitting responses to remove that thing, that one thing that you consider to be good. And if we stay silent on that, then the feedback, the summary of responses that the host will have of this consultation is that will be overwhelmingly negative on this thing, as opposed to truly reflecting, your view on whether it's good or bad. So note the good as well as the bad, I would say. And on that, the good and the bad that you note relating to the consultation or whether proposal or what have you can relate to both content and process. So, and what I mean by that is, so for example, of here, Fair Seas welcomes draft actions X, Y, and Z, in this policy document, the proposal. So that's about the content of the proposal itself, but also, you know, mentioning or critiquing or kind of commenting on the process by which this proposal came about is important, can be important too. So, for example, Fair Seas welcomes the involvement of stakeholders in the development of Policy X. And that's something that we find ourselves commenting on quite often because stakeholder engagement is very, very important, especially in the marine conservation MPA sphere, as is most policy developing spheres, I would say. And sometimes it's done very well here in Ireland, and sometimes it's not done at all. So it's just something that you can comment on as well. Number seven is be constructive, where relevant, suggest your alternative proposal or vision. Don't just point out why this needs to be removed. Paragraph X of page, 10. Say, and it should be replaced with this, and I often actually propose exact alternative text when it's appropriate as well. And number eight, a general one, make it easy on the reader. Detail your page numbers and specific texts and / paragraphs that you're referring to in your response when you're critiquing or examining the document. Format your response so that connected issues flow and are grouped together. I mean, this is all fairly straightforward stuff. Use subheadings. I find those really useful to structure my responses and make it more digestible for me, for the reader, and also if you want to use your response in other ways afterwards, as an advocacy tool of some kind. And keep the text clear and concise. And in my view, in the consultation responses are not literature reviews, although there may be other views on that. But we absolutely need to use reference best available evidence to support and strengthen your arguments. So if you're reviewing the all the available evidence and using it to back up a point or a change or an argument, then that's the space you need to be. Whereas if you're reviewing the evidence just as an FYI, to the host of the consultation, and you're not actually making a point, an argument or a proposal at the end of it, then it may be less. The host, the reader, then is not getting anything from your work there. So it needs to back up, your strength and your argument and the points that you want to make. And number 9, be realistic. So consultations are often concerning initiatives, changes, policy developments, what have you, that are already some way, if not a long way, progressed down the road. And sometimes, often, the fundamental direction of that policy or what have you has already been agreed and decided by government or whoever. So you need to be strategic with what change you ask for, realistic with what change you may actually get. However, and this is a really important point, this does not mean that we sacrifice our ambition or principles or red lines in our responses. It just means that, I guess what it means is we have to be realistic about the scope and power of written public consultations. They're incredibly important, but on their own are quite narrow way of advocating for a change, if that's what you want. And they're not the only way to advocate and bring about change is probably the point I should make there. And number 10, stick to the remit of the consultation. If it isn't directly or indirectly relevant to the consultation topic and purpose, then it won't and can't be considered. So you'll be best putting your efforts in other ways, or responding to a different consultation, or just not at all. And then some practical tips to end your submission in my last slide. If submitting via email, send your submission as a PDF, not a Word document. Include your contact details on the written submission, not just the email that you send in. Note the submission. So when the consultation is published, note the deadlines. Give yourself time to complete and submit, because especially if you're collaborating with others, it'll take time and it'll inevitably take more time than you allow for. Don't be afraid to ask for an extension either. And the earlier you ask for an extension before the deadline, the better. Don't be afraid to complain that the consultation window is too short. They often are, but don't bank on getting it. And some statutory consultations, for example, are more rigid and you won't get any flexibility. Others, you may get flexibility if you have a good reason. The government, particularly, some departments like to put out consultations just like a week before the Christmas break, at the start of December or mid-December, and then it's just a way, they feel good about themselves having getting it out the door before the Christmas break. But then that leaves us, the stakeholders to try and get a response together over Christmas and New Year break. So that's not really very fair, and we have pulled up the MPWS on that last year, and we did get an extension to a consultation that they had put out. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask, but don't bank on us. And if appropriate, use, as I said earlier, really kind of repeating myself here, but use your submission as an advocacy tool to engage with policy and decision makers. Written public consultation is just one way to bring about the change that you want to see. It's a really important way. But it is just one way, and there may be other ways in which you want to use your submission as an advocacy tool, or do other, types of advocacy to get where you want to be. And that's it. Whistle stop tour. Thank you very much for listening. Gurmagov.
Thanks very much, Donal. Okay, so next we have Sean, who is Planning and Environmental Policy Officer at Ontashka. Sean's role is to assess and make submissions on planning applications of all types and scales in fulfillment of Ontashka's prescribed function, as well as drafting and collaborating on planning and environmental policy submissions. He also responds to planning related queries from Ontashka members and the general public, and helps to manage Ontashka's prescribed function as a consultee in the forestry license system. So he's got a lot of experience with responding and writing submissions, and he's going to tell us more about it now.
Thanks for the introduction, Jenny. Are the slides visible? Yeah.
Let me see. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm delighted to be here today on behalf of Ontashka to offer some of our experience in making these offshore wind planning submissions. So these would be the ones in the planning space, and I think we've made about 5 or 6 submissions on these so far for the ones off the East Coast. So to kick off, just want to describe a little bit about Ontashka's prescribed status. So since the 1960s, we have been written into the planning regulations as a legal consultee. So we have we spent a lot of time making these planning submissions. And then we're also a prescribed body in 4 other areas: agriculture, forestry, disposal at sea, and industrial emissions licensing. But for today, I'm just going to focus on our planning and development remit. So what exactly does prescribed mean? So it means that we must be consulted by decision makers on environmental and built heritage issues. So if a development is deemed to have these kind of potential impacts, and the offshore wind planning applications would fall into this. And then when we are making planning submissions, our analytical lens tries to balance between 3 different things. So climate, biodiversity, and heritage considerations. So always trying to have a balanced perspective and analysis with those 3 things in mind. So just also to mention as well that we have an advocacy queries email in which people might contact us, and I would invite people to also contact us if they have any planning related queries, where we try to defend the public interest, act on people's environmental concerns, and give the public a voice. So whether you have a specific planning issue in mind, or you don't want to make a submission, we can try and incorporate some of your concerns in our own submission. So just if you want to make note of that email at the bottom there, if you ever want to contact us. So based on our experience, what are the impacts that we have found that planning submissions can actually make? And we hope that what we say here will serve as inspiration for anyone that want to make a submission or community groups. So firstly, the content of your observation can cause the planning authority to ask for further information from the developer due to some specific points that you have brought up that they may have overlooked. Secondly, conditions can also be applied to the planning permission based on things that have been highlighted. So that's another tangible impact that a submission can have. And then thirdly, a submission can result in particularly problematic proposals being refused. So all of these tangible impacts should definitely be used as inspiration, encouragement, and motivation for anyone looking to make planning submissions. But I would also like to mention that making planning submissions isn't just about objecting. It's also about ensuring the highest standards, environmental assessment, ensuring high quality development that's sustainable and that ensures maximum protection for the environment. And I think submissions don't always need to be negative, and maybe sometimes they have that reputation. So you can also support applications, which I think is important, an important point to make. And I think Donald alluded to it as well, pointing out the good as well as the bad. And then also, if you think there's an information deficit within a planning submission, you can say to the planning authority, which for offshore wind applications is on Bortoluzzi, You could say to them, there's information missing. We think you could ask for further information on a specific aspect. So regarding actually making the offshore wind submissions, so an application is made by the developer, who's called the applicant, under Section 291 of the Planning and Development Act 2000, as amended over the years. And then that is sent, that marine application is sent directly to An Bord Pleanála, and it bypasses the County Council. And An Bord Pleanála is soon to be on Comisiún Pleanála, which is something to keep in mind with the new Planning Act. And then the submission period is triggered, which is usually about 8 weeks. There's a strict deadline, and finding information on this actual deadline can be hard to find. So I'm going to actually show you where to find that now in a second. And you could, I'll actually do that now. So where to find the application information. So there's two ways of doing so. Firstly, under legislation, there has to be a dedicated project website compiled by the developer. So on the left, you can see, in this case, it's for the Oriel wind farm project, which I think is the one that was off the County Louth coast. So they have information up on that website, or you can go to An Bord Pleanála's website, which admittedly isn't the very easiest to navigate. And you need information such as the 6-digit reference number, a development description, or the name of the developer. And then you can look at the planning application documentation within that. So just real quickly, I'm just going to show you if I can move this bar somehow. Does anyone know how to do that? There we are. Okay, so I mentioned the Oriel wind farm project website, which you can see here. And at the top of the screen, you can see there's planning documents, planning drawings, so you can get a sense of what the application would look like, where it's located, and then environmental documents. And environmental impact assessment report documents are very important in this case, as well as Natura impact statement documents, which concern the assessment of the application's impact on protected European sites. So, for example, sorry about this annoying bar. So I always go to the non-technical summary that's provided within the environmental impact assessment documentation. It's more of a plain English language summary. And scrolling down, you can go to all of the environmental factors that are being assessed. For example, climate. And then it'll give you like a summary of how they assess that particular environmental factor. And then you can kind of analyze and assess that yourself. So the non-technical summary, I think, is very important in this case. So that's through the project website. Alternatively, you can go to An Bord Pleanála's website. If you scroll down here, if you know the case number, which is 6 digits, you can throw it in here, or the development description. In this case, Oriel, I'll type that in real quick, and you can find it through here. And there's pre-application consultations, which you can ignore here. You're looking for the application itself. So let's say marine development application, and you click in, and you can find the information of the development, the description, and some other information. However, annoyingly, it doesn't tell you where's the submission deadline. So you have to dig a bit deeper for that. And usually that is within the planning particulars. So in this case, you can go into the planning particulars document, and it will have the site notice in there usually, or there's like a cover letter or something along those lines. But for the public, a site notice is very important, and that's where you find the submission deadline. So when you click in, you can find the site notice. So this is the site notice, tell you information about the development and that what the applicant wants to do. And usually you scroll down to the bottom and you can find the submission deadline information, which in this case is here. And that provides two very important pieces of information. Firstly, that the submission you're making must be accompanied by a fee of €50, except for certain prescribed bodies, which fortunately on Tashka, we don't have to make a payment, but community groups, members of the public will have to make, and will have to pay the fee. And then crucially, the submission must be received by the board not later than 5:30 p.m. on the 30th of July 2024. So that's the essential information. That's your deadline, and they won't accept anything after that 5:30 p.m. deadline on that day. So that's very important. Scroll to the bottom of the site notice and find that deadline, and then get started as early as possible on your submission. So another thing I just want to show, and I can share this link at the end of the presentation. So what I'm trying to describe and outline here on Bortoluzzi, I have a dedicated page describing making an observation on marine application, which includes offshore wind farms. And that again describes some of the information that I've been trying to articulate here about the fee, the 8-week observation window, and what the observation must include. So it's the planning considerations alone, non-planning considerations, personal grievances, maybe some defamatory comments, these kind of things they won't consider. It has to be specific to the application in question. So I'm just going to go back to my screen real quick, back to the presentation, and then just to finally highlight some tips, of which there are 6 in total. So as I was saying, try and get started as early as possible to articulate yourself, to articulate your points, because you only have those 8 weeks. Importantly, your name and postal address needs to be on your observation. If you're submitting on behalf of an organization, you need to include the full name of your organizational rep. So that's very important. You also need the name and location of the development, or the 6-digit on Bortoluzzi reference number, so they know what your application, what your observation, which application is talking about, because there are many. So that will help them. Your perspective counts. Local knowledge and context is absolutely crucial. The decision makers and legal consultees might overlook points that you're making, that you've made. So don't be afraid. Your local expertise is crucial. Your structure and evidence-based observations is also very important to enhance your credibility and your presentation and everything like that. And then finally, as I was saying earlier, stick to the points relevant to the planning application in question. No personal grievances or defamation or whatever, and no non-planning points. So yeah, I think that concludes my presentation for now, and looking forward to any potential questions at the end. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Sean. And yeah, that getting started early is really important, because 8 weeks really isn't much time. So next we have Rochelle. Rochelle is a pull it up, Marine Spatial Planning Officer at Birdwatch Island. She's on the MARÉIRE team. Her role is to engage with government strategically on offshore renewable plans, respond to offshore renewable planning applications, and propose marine protected area plans. And in addition, she also engages with the relevant environmental pillar and IEN representatives on these topics, and contributes to broader public engagement and communication. And today she's going to be talking, I believe, about collaborative and transboundary responses. Over to you, Rochelle.
Thank you, Jenny. Can you guys hear me and see my slides all right?
Perfect.
Awesome. So like Jenny said, I'm going to talk about collaborative and transboundary responses kind of in particular, since everybody else is doing such a good job of kind of giving you general ideas of how to go about responses. So just to kind of start with collaborative responses and submissions, kind of generally, this is when you're working with others, either inside your organization or outside your organization, to help promote your points together or kind of combine your efforts. And one of the keys of this is good partnership. It really helps to have a lot of different people either working on the same topic or on different topics, kind of working together to get the best representations and the best points across. What's really key to this is really clear and consistent communication, especially if you're working across teams or across different organizations. You want to be really clear with each other about what your expectations are for the response and for the submissions, and what you expect in terms of other people's help and time. And to harken back to what everyone's saying today, you really want to leave a lot of time to work on collaborative responses. When everyone needs to read the documents or put their inputs or get their eyes on a draft, you just need to kind of add in extra time so that everyone has time to do such things. And also, you kind of need to be aware when you're working with other people that they may have other work and other deadlines on their plates that they're having to work with. Like right now, we just started the seabird season. So when I try and get to some of my seabird team, they're often out in the field. They're running all over the place. So I really have to be aware of what times and deadlines they might have during your response period. So you can kind of prepare for that when you need to hear back from certain people. Also, when you're working on collaborative responses, there's going to be a lot more meetings to make sure everyone's on the same page, everyone's inputs are being put into the right places, and that everyone feels like the response that you all have your names on actually promotes and is correct in terms of what everybody wants to have said for them. So when I'm thinking of collaborative responses, I kind of made these two categories, but kind of what it boils down to is whether or not you're going to be working on the same document, or are these going to be two different documents that complement each other. So the first type I have is complementary, and that's when you're working on two different documents that kind of complement each other. When you do these kinds of documents, I think it's really key in some of your early meetings to discuss how you want to refer to each other's documents and also what you want to do in terms of data sharing. Because sometimes the data you might be using is proprietary or it's not published. So then we want to be really clear that when we're looking at each other's data and we're trying to reference each other's data, that it's okay to use the data and that we're referencing it correctly. You also want to make sure, again, that you're meeting pretty regularly. My example here is myself. I worked on a Northern Ireland Seabird Strategy and Action Plan response in coordination with the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds in Northern Ireland. So they did their own separate response to the action plan, and we had our own separate response to the action plan. But we wanted to make sure that in our response, we were referencing each other and that we were using our response with Birdwatch Ireland to not only represent Republic of Ireland bird concerns in terms of how our birds are shared across the Northern Ireland border, but also that we were supporting the other actions that the RSPB was promoting. So they went for a lot more in depth in their response with very specific sites that they were concerned about. And in our response, we ended up going for a more broad, focusing on shared birds, this idea of transboundary bird use, and ensuring that when we think about these kind of large-scale issues and species that do span across both of our countries' borders, that we're working on this collaboration together. I think what was really key in this meeting too is that we sat down and we decided how we were going to refer to each other's responses. So there were a couple of spots in my response where I just, instead of offering my own opinion, I would say, please see the RSPB Northern Ireland response for more specific details. And they did the same thing when they were talking about some of the marine things. Please see the Birdwatch Ireland response for more details on how this affects the Republic of Ireland. So it was really helpful to have those regular meetings. We met first to get started. We kind of shared a couple of drafts back and forth. And then about a week before the due date, we sat down and kind of made sure that we were all happy with in terms of what was being said, that they supported each other, and that, when we referenced each other's data, that it was appropriately referenced. So what I'm calling a joint response is when these two groups or two collaborators are working on the same document. For myself, this happens a lot within my own Birdwatch Ireland team. So my example here was our response submission to the Codling Wind Park, which ended up having 3 separate parts of the Birdwatch Ireland team involved, because there was the Dublin Bay Birds Project that monitors terns nesting in Dublin Bay that was interested. We had our Waterbird Survey folks who were interested in the cabling route that was going over an intertidal area that was really important to wintering birds. And then I had my seabird team that was interested in the marine array and how the turbines themselves would interact with birds foraging and utilizing the marine environment. So when you're working 3 different groups on this one document, again, you want to leave lots of time for people to read and edit. What I like to do is kind of have a lot of emails where I'll kind of throw out a few ideas in terms of what I'm thinking. I'll draft up a response, and then I'll put it in a Google document, shareable focus, so that other people can then add in stuff or put comments or change text. One of the things I'll say is that every time I share the link, I download a copy so that if someone accidentally deletes a paragraph that we want to use later, it's not totally gone. I have a backup. So that's really important to make sure that you're doing while you have multiple people editing the same document. And one of the other things I do when I have multiple teams is I try to compile the relevant information or documents for people who are otherwise really busy. So for this Codling Park response, all of these different sections, the folks from the Dublin Bay Birds didn't necessarily need to read about the intertidal section. So I actually went through and pulled out page numbers and sent everyone the page numbers that I needed them to read that were relevant to where they had concerns about the project. These days, when my seabird team is so stretched trying to get started on all of the seabird monitoring that'll be happening this breeding season, I actually just send them direct questions, or I'll screenshot a table I want them to check out and tell me that, what they think about it. And I try to keep it really short and really quick because I know that they've got, a couple seconds at an email before they're running out to their next survey. So I try to really make sure that what I'm asking from them is appropriate for their schedule as well. So I'm also going to talk to you guys about transboundary responses. So these are responses that are happening outside of the Republic of Ireland that may still impact the Republic of Ireland's environment or activities, or in my case, birds. So these are going to be ones nearby or within the same region. So you're talking about like shared seas, migration routes, flyways, and watersheds. Most of the transboundary responses I've done have been UK submissions where we have shared seas, and obviously birds that are kind of crossing the boundary between the two countries without much care. So I've included here the website for where you can find UK submissions. But oftentimes there is a requirement for transboundary submissions to go ahead and also do a response in Ireland. So if you go to the gov.ie website and search transboundary, you'll be able to pull up a lot of these responses that will have impacts or expected to have impacts on the Republic of Ireland as well. And one thing I'll say about transboundary responses is really helpful to have partnerships and collaborators in the place that you are responding to. So when I work in the UK, I'm really lucky that I have close contacts with the RSPB, and I can just go to them directly when I don't understand a submission or I'm having confusion about how the process works. I find it really helpful rather than trying to dig through all these documents and legalese to figure out what their process is, to just go to them and ask them, okay, where should I be involved? Where can I help? They can also help you find projects that are relevant to you. So now that I've got some of these contacts, the folks in Wales, they email me when they think things are coming up that I'm interested in the Celtic Sea. I email stuff out from, our Irish Sea to the folks in England, and we try and stay in touch that way so that we're working together. But if you're not as lucky to be part of like a very close bird sharing network, it might help to reach out to groups that are similar to your own, other NGOs that have similar focus, and see if there are people who are interested in doing this kind of collaborative work across boundaries with you. So one thing when you're doing transboundary responses is to be aware of the different jurisdictions, rules, and laws and procedures. So these are going to be differences in how your submission might be evaluated or differences in the application process. I know for one of the Welsh ones, really down low in the fine text was that on your email and in your document, a certain amount of the information needed to be in capital block letters. And if you didn't do that, your response was not going to be considered. So really pay attention to how the rules might be different to ensure that your information is making it through the process and getting to the eyes of the people you want it to see. Another thing is to really do your research on these projects and ensure that you have relevant reasons for responding to it so that you are bringing up issues that are truly transboundary and that have basis in the Republic of Ireland based on the actions of another country or another area. So for these, you really want to cite your sources. When I respond to transboundary responses, I always try to, I know it's not supposed to be a literature review, but mine certainly kind of end up looking like literature reviews sometimes when I try to bring up relevant papers that show birds, moving across the border, specific studies that show birds from the Republic of Ireland moving through their area or utilizing their area, or vice versa, birds from their colonies coming over into our waters during important periods, and really stick to those points of what's relevant for your country and for your boundaries of what you're responding on. So I think Stephen will go into more detail, but just to show you kind of some of the things you might see post-submission. So you'll see further information requests. You won't necessarily get a response back saying like, hey, yeah, we love that. but you'll see hints that people were listening to you. The one above I have here is a submission that we made where we brought up migration movements of geese. And then we noticed in the further information request for that project, they asked again for more information and more studies to be done on the project's impact on migrating geese. So you will see signs that your submissions are kind of helping move things forward. But you may also get direct contact. We were directly contacted by the developers of a Welsh offshore wind farm recently to discuss our concerns regarding Irish seabirds. So, we had this meeting with the developers. I contacted my folks in Wales. They were also having a meeting with the developers, and we've got a meeting scheduled next week for myself and the RSPB Welsh team to sit down, kind of talk about how those two meetings went and figure out how we want to move forward regarding our shared seabirds and how the project should move forward. And you'll also get, there'll be different ways for how different authorities contact you post-submission. So for the UK planning inspector, once you've lodged a submission, they're going to send you emails to different notifications and meetings on anything that has to do with that application. So this was an email I got a little while ago asking me about the next meeting for a response that we had sent in. So that's what I have for you all today. Thank you so much for your time, and I will pass it back to Jenny.
Thanks so much, Rochelle. And yeah, I think that's a really important topic to cover is these collaborative and transboundary pieces. I know that myself, I've responded to Northern Irish consultation. And I think the part that's really important about that is that you can, it's reciprocal. So hopefully those partners in the other countries will be able to support your submissions as well in your own country, and you kind of help give each other more credence in your submission. Okay, so next we have Stephen. Dr. Stephen Comerford is the ORE and Marine Biodiversity Officer at the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group. His role is to help develop and enhance IWDG policies in relation to offshore renewable energy. He will consult with government agencies, developers, environmental organizations, and stakeholder groups to put forward the case for better conservation of cetaceans and their habitats at all stages of the development of offshore wind resources. And he's going to be telling us about his process in making submissions.
Thanks, Jenny. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm Stephen Comerford, ORE Biodiversity Officer for the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group, as Jenny said, and I'll just bring you for a quick trot through my process in making submissions on behalf of the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group. So when we started to discuss this, I went back through my records to see how many submissions I'd made since I started the job 2 years ago, and it's 35. That's a lot. I had no idea I'd made so many, but it's obviously an important part of what we do. The last one I did was the Ringaskiddy Port development. The one on my desk currently is the Dublin Array project in the Irish Sea. I've done 4 on the ORE phase 1s and various other, marine themed consultations, Fishing Inside 6, Marine Strategy Framework Directive, etc. But I'm going to talk specifically about the phase 1 ORE consultations and submissions in this webinar. And it's what I'm currently working on in any case. So as people have already alluded to, you need to make a plan. You need to be clear from the outset what it is you hope to do. So what's your purpose? There are many. You can inform the assessment process, bring additional information, register your protest or your support for a project, or raise the profile of your organization, which is also valid because these are public documents. After all, they are published. The Whale and Dolphin Group mostly concentrate on the first 2, which is to inform the assessment process and to bring additional information. And again, this has been mentioned. What is the best possible outcome from your point of view? Identify that, and then maybe identify what's a more likely result. Things may already be progressing in a direction and you're not going to be able to turn the tide on that. So you need to be realistic about it. And by being realistic, you'll be more focused in your submission. In terms of preparation, you need to select the area you're going to discuss, as in the subject, as opposed to the geographical area. The EIARs and the natural impact statements for the ORE projects are thousands of pages, so you have to focus right in on what your area of interest is. The area of interest for us is, of course, marine mammals. So there'll be a chapter on marine mammals, but then associated with that chapter, there'll be a chapter on underwater noise modelling. There'll be a marine mammal mitigation protocol. There'll be the long form of the results of their burden marine mammal surveys and so on. So they're all of interest. So you need to gather them all up. And then what I like to do, and I have the advantage of a bit of a head start on this, you do build it up over time, is I gather the literature, and I start with the papers cited in the documents by the developer, by the proponent, and I sort of read out from there. So I get the papers, I read them, sometimes in some detail, sometimes in far less detail. But the more you inform yourself and the more you read, the more credibility your response is going to have, because the more evidence-based it's going to be. And in the Well and Dolphin Group, it is all evidence-based after all. So in terms of the delivery, again, this has been touched on. Introduce your organization and specify your interest in the project. Be organized. Chapter sections, subheads, refer accurately to the applicant's documentation, because whoever's reading this, if they can't find the bit you're referring to, they're going to lose interest pretty quickly. And it doesn't, again, there's that credibility issue. So I sometimes quote the sections I want to discuss directly. If it's not too long, I'll just cut and paste it and drop it into my document in italics and then respond to it. And if it's too long, then I might summarize a section. But, if you're summarizing sections, don't be disingenuous, summarize it accurately. You're not going to gain anything by putting words in their mouths. Make your point and make your points. Refer to the literature, peer-reviewed for preference, of course. The proponents may be using grey literature for some of their stuff, so in which case it's okay for you to do so as well. But our approach always is this sort of very scientific approach, and our arguments are largely based on science. So that's the way we tackle it. Also, you could be arguing on process, on legislation, EU and national plans, best practice. Best practice is a good one. In that the consultancy may say, it is best practice to do X in certain case, but that refers to a particular jurisdiction, and you can reply with some with a degree of accuracy that it might be best practice in the UK, but it's not best practice in Germany or Denmark or another European jurisdiction. So you can open up an argument quite well on the best practice front at times. We don't tend to tackle local knowledge and local issues. We tend to keep it, on a national level. But they are, and Sean's alluded to this, these are very valid points for community groups and other NGOs. And summarize and conclude, your last couple of paragraphs should hit on all the points you've already made, wrap them up, be punchy there. Make your point strongly. You're entitled to do so. Just a few observations then. These submissions will be read, particularly in the planning process, they will be read and they will be considered. So make it count. You have a platform here that you may not otherwise have. So decide what you want from it and go at it. And don't forget that it's a human person at the other end. Don't make it too hard for them. Keep it tight, keep it short. Don't go off on tangents. Again, this has been mentioned before about, not getting it, I'll go to this later on. Don't make it personal, don't make it emotional. Don't slander people, don't attack people. Keep it specific to the topic in hand. Correct the applicant's homework. They will make mistakes, and you might find that they've referenced paper incorrectly, or they've, they've misspelled something, if they've transposed something incorrectly, they've cut and pasted, doubled up. They'll make those mistakes. You will notice them. Correct their homework, yes. It does add credibility. It does show that you've read it. It does show that you know what you're talking about, but you're not going to change the world with it, so do it sparingly as well. And if you don't have anything intelligent to say nothing. I think that's what it goes along with just keeping it tight and keeping to the topic. Don't make it personal. And we don't usually get feedback, as Michelle said. We send these things off into the dark and don't hear another word about it, except occasionally, and particularly in the planning side of things, we will see some success. This is an example from the Oriole submission. I happened to pick up on something at a conference about a particular type of underwater noise modeling, which is not something I understand in any great detail, but it's very central to what we do. And Oriole used, in their submission, they used this type of modeling, and it's quite problematic. So I found a paper to say this. I contacted the author. He assured me that I'd got the right end of the stick. So I put it in the submission, and lo and behold, when on board Planola looked for further information from the applicant, they referenced that specifically. So I think we can say with some confidence that that came from us. So we'll be pleased about that. And then more generally, there are 3 FIRs in now from on board Planola on the phase 1 projects. And we've always banged on about temporary threshold shift, which is a type of injury to whales and dolphins, and in our submission to Oriole, but on others as well, we've said that they've ignored that TTS is also considered an injury under Irish legislation, and that we call on the proponent to reformulate the marine mammal mitigation strategy to adopt noise abatement technology, which would reduce the impacts. And there we see in the FIR, again in the Oriole case, but to others as well, that they refer to the offence to injure, the TTS may constitute an injury, and that they require comprehensive submission on noise abatement measures. So, these things do have an impact. It's worth doing them, and it's worth doing them to the best of your ability and, to the limits of what capacity you have, because you can make a difference and have an effect. And what would an Irish Whale and Dolphin Group presentation be without some pretty pictures at the end? That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Stephen. On that note, that's the end of the presentations. But I also wanted to point out to those watching that if you are a group that wishes to engage with consultations or attend stakeholder engagement events, for example, but you don't have the funds, as Sean pointed out, each submission has a €50 fee associated with it. If you can't afford it or don't have the funds allocated to put towards it, please do contact us. The MARÉIRE project has some funds to support groups to engage with this process. So please do get in touch. And with that, we are going to have a few minutes for questions. I know that a couple of people had to run, but if there are any questions from those who are still here, we'd love to take them. I know that Grace has left a couple of questions before heading off. So I'll ask those first, and then if anyone has any more questions, we can have a chat. So to the panelists, whoever wants to take this, Grace wonders what happens if onboard Planola seeks further information from the developers. What happens then? I suppose, what are the steps after the FIR? Sean?
Maybe I can have a go with that one. So my understanding of this is it's in section 292 of the Planning and Development Act, and my interpretation of that section is that when a further information request goes in, it may open a new consultation window, and then if the provided information from the developer is deemed significant, especially with regard to the EIA or AA information, then a new consultation window opens up in which the public can comment. I think that time frame is at the discretion of the board with regard to these applications in particular, which I think is a bit different to normal planning applications, which have a 2-week window. But maybe someone else knows a bit more about that. And so that's at the discretion of the board and has to be deemed significant. And then again, the observation that you make on the further information that's submitted has to be specific to that further information. And I don't think they would consider other points. It has to be, yeah, as we said, specific to that.
Did anyone have anything? Yes, Stephen?
Actually, nothing to add to that, but a question for Sean on that. Is the process that they will then inform the people who have made submissions and contact them and to say that this new consultation has opened up?
Yeah, that's a good point, Stephen. I think that it's a choice by the board. So they will either go and circulate it to the wider public, particularly, yeah, as I said, with EIA and AA, but then maybe with more specific information, they might contact people who made submissions with relation to that information. So I think there's a choice there by the board, and it depends on the information that is submitted, but definitely, yes, they can reach out to the people who made original submissions for their perspective and observation on that.
Thanks, Sean.
Great, thanks, Sean. And her follow-up question was, what happens if the development is passed, I suppose, despite if there were, environmental concerns or particular objections, but the development is passed anyway? What can be done? Is there an appeals process? And how does that work?
Maybe I can have a go with that one again. So again, a bit different to normal planning. In normal planning, it goes to the county council, and then you can appeal to An Bord Pleanála, and then judicial review. But in this case, because it's gone straight to An Bord Pleanála, your only recourse is to take a judicial review to the High Court. An important point here, though, is I think people might have the impression that you're challenging whether the decision is right or wrong, but the High Court will only consider procedural and administrative law issues. So it's like the lawfulness of the decision, the procedural points. So I think that's a really important point to make. And if anyone has interest in it, I think it's in Section 50 of the Planning and Development Act. But with the new Planning Act, all those sections will change anyway. So it's gonna, I'll have to find them again. And then, I think you can take it to the Supreme Court if you're not happy with the High Court decision. But all of this stuff costs, so it's a big decision to be made by whoever wants to do it.
Fair enough. Thank you, Sean. Does anyone have anything else to say about that? No. Are there any other questions, maybe from Rosalind or Martina? You're the last two on the call, so not to put you on the spot. If you do have a question, feel free to put your mic on, or you can also drop it in the chat. If not, I have a question for Rochelle. I was wondering, Rochelle, if you think that there are particular circumstances where a complementary versus a joint submission are more appropriate or more powerful than other, than other situations.
Yeah, I guess it's definitely a conversation to have with your collaborators. I think when I think about whether or not it should be a joint or complementary, I try to think about the purview of the two organizations. So like when the folks from RSPB Northern Ireland and I had this conversation about the Northern Irish Seabird Action Plan, they were telling me about a lot of their concerns in terms of like stuff that was happening on land at colonies. And I was thinking, okay, from our perspective of Birdwatch Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, not to say that I don't care about what happens at those colonies. I do care, but it's not important to our interests as Birdwatch Ireland. Our interests are more about the shared spaces, the use of the marine, the idea that our birds from our colonies would go up and forage in their seas, the idea that their birds from their colonies might come and forage in our seas, or we might have some interaction between colonies in terms of different birds going over and recruiting. So it didn't feel appropriate for us to do a joint submission because they needed to say things that were a lot more specific and intense than what I needed to say under my purview. So I think it's important to have those kind of conversations to decide whether or not you should be a complementary or joint submission.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rochelle. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for joining and for listening and for presenting, to our presenters especially. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this.